Hello and welcome everybody to what is turning into part 3 of our review podcast. We're going to move on to the 50s and beyond. I think so, moving on to the 40s, just because that blends into one. Splinter and Concussion, I think we're both pretty comfortable would take a drop. I wouldn't move Concussion much further down than TR2, like Toast said, but if Nick's not moving TR2 down, then that sort of changes my answer. I think they probably would go back to back these days. Concussion is more iconic to me, but I do think that Nick's right in saying that TR2 is more popular than like your Stegosaurus or your Ironside or your other one-off grand finalists. Splinter to me definitely has overperformed, and I'd probably dump it down about 10.
Yeah, no doubt about that. We put a lot of emphasis on it as both a successful robot and as a famous victim. But when we got to the top 50, the quality of machine really jumped, and Splinter was somewhat the exception in there.
For sure. Yeah, like to have Splinter in the same region as Supernova, Atomic, Bulldog Breed, and 13 Black just sort of shows like, they're not quite on par. Even Kilotron relative to its time. Yeah. I'd probably have Splinter, like looking at the obvious comparisons, you've got Tough as Nails and Can Opener as some gripping machines, and your one-time semi-finalists, you've got your Steg 2s and your Spawn of Scutters. So yeah, I think Splinter probably would probably outperform Spawn of Scudder and Steg 2 because it does have the iconic loss. But yeah, definitely wouldn't be much higher than 61.
Yeah, like you mentioned Tough as Nails there with the similar weaponry to Splinter, and I can't believe that Splinter's not only higher but by 12 spaces.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So, on to this next batch. So, to summarise, the 50 range, the 40s, we had Splinter, Concussion, 48 Kilotron, Supernova, Atomic, Bulldog Breed, 259, Napalm, 13 Black, and the Steel Avenger. So this is going to be a fun batch. Let's start with Supernova, because this should be a nice quick one. There's been some discussion about Supernova going up, down, staying the same. Toast, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was happy to see people calling for it to go higher. That bit of validation helps. I'm glad people were on board with it and agreed. I would be more likely to move it up than move it down. I do honestly feel it's kind of in the right spot, and if I moved it up, it wouldn't go very far.
No, I think it's right where it should be. I don't think I could justify putting it above Atomic or, 13 Black, like the other sort of robots like that. I couldn't justify putting it above them.
The robots directly above it are a very, very hard type of roadblock to jump over at that point.
It's like a ceiling.
Yeah. Supernova definitely has credentials, and again, as Tosh said, glad it had a good amount of support, but at the same time, just because it has support doesn't mean the machines above it don't have their own right as well, so...
I honestly think that without the reboot, Supernova might have almost taken a jump, because... obviously, without the reboot, there's robots that aren't even on the list, and we'll come back to that as a discussion point shortly. But Supernova, to me, the fact that it only got one really good fight in the reboot, which was just trashing Frostbite twice, that definitely took a lot of the shine off. Like, Supernova lost its positive win-loss record in the reboot. It went from more wins than losses to the opposite. And to me, that's just really...
it had its very sudden change in appearance as well, which was a little hard for its identity building. I think the reboot helped more than it didn't. It certainly established it as an all-star. Like the fact that they wanted Surin Belendran to be one of the mentors in Battle of the Stars just shows it was definitely seen as the veteran that it often struggled to build itself as. On Robot Wars, like, we know that Surin Belendran was there since Series 2 with Oblivion, but the average viewer wasn't going to know that. I was glad that with the reboot, they were actually making a conscious effort to show Supernova as one of the longest-running veterans going. But, I'm happy with this slot, and that's about the gist of that one.
Good. So the next discussion point is more one that's between Toast and me than really anybody else. And when we took a poll on it, it seemed to be quite level, but definitely skewed against my view, but I'm more interested in as a discussion. Atomic and Bulldog breed tended to sort of go together in a lot, and there was quite a fierce discussion about who should go higher. I ultimately prevailed by putting Bulldog breed ahead, but I'll give Toast a chance to articulate his views on Atomic, and I'll quickly respond, and then people in the comments jump in with your opinions as well.
Yeah, like it's important to stress that even as someone who thinks Atomic is more iconic than Bulldog breed, I'm still perfectly. I think it's great to have them back to back because they have the same credentials. Bulldog breed has more heat finals than Atomic did. You know, they both had a Series 4 heat final. They were both in the same heat in Series 5, where one was the seed and the other was the actual heat finalist due to a dodgy draw. They both had a Mayhem win in Extreme before dropping out of the Annihilator. Series 6 is obviously the big thing for Bulldog breed because it's got an appearance at all in that one, and the Extreme 2 Tag Team Terror to follow, which Atomic didn't have in any capacity. But even though both machines got to the top 8 of Series 7, I think that Atomic carried so much more weight that I wouldn't hesitate to put it higher, because the whole way through Atomic was so impressive in Series 7. It built itself up as one of the absolute favourites, and I think a key thing is that it lost in a what-if scenario. It nearly toppled the champion and then took itself out, and so you still see people saying they could have beaten Typhoon, maybe they could have beaten Storm too. Could they have actually gone on and won the series? No such discussion exists for Bulldog breed, who was mainly criticised, if anything, throughout its Series 7 campaign for not getting the Uta. Whether that's a fair call or not, it certainly was apparent. People expected it to lose to Tough as Nails, whereas Atomic was the heavy favourite in all of its fights. Even when it wasn't the seeded machine, we clearly knew it was going to beat Smidsy, and they set the Uta record for Series 7 consecutively along the way. And the main thing for me is that it's just such a vibrant colour. It's such a recognisable machine from that personality that it carries. Bulldog breed has one as well, but that's purely in the visual design and not so much in the fighting for me, whereas nothing fought like Atomic, and it left people wanting more. And that's why it's still I saw it brought up on Reddit a lot during the reboot as something people wanted to see again, how it could have been one of the great all-stars, whereas Bulldog breed definitely peaked. I don't think it would make a top 8 again. Obviously there was no environment for that, but yeah, happy to hear your side then, TG.
It's well stated, and I will, before I go into my case, I'll definitely acknowledge that Atomic going out on the what if scenario definitely helps Atomic. A lot of people mourn the loss of Atomic in Series 7 rather than Bulldog breed, who sort of went out in a very good fight, but like you say, one that it was never expected. It was decided pretty much on the first hit, and it was really more of an entertaining fight based on the destruction rather than the possibilities. I will definitely disagree that they have the same credentials. I think Bulldog breed easily has the more impressive resume, whether it's almost double the number of series entered, almost double the number of heat finals reached. It has a trophy, which Atomic doesn't, and it has more appearances just in general. So I think that Bulldog breed is by far the more accomplished. Does accomplishments mean iconic? Not necessarily. When you look at some of the other robots that we're about to discuss, like 259, no, definitely not. But I think that that was ultimately, to me, the deciding factor, is that if you've got two robots that have very similar resumes, but one's got a higher resume, and they've got the same peak in the same series, just a trophy will carry it for me. That's a lot of weight to carry. And that's why I'm very happy with it being over Atomic. I would never have them anything other than back-to-back, because I do think they are very similar, and the fact that Atomic is as popular as it is with half the appearances the Bulldog breed has to be respected. But no, that is why I firmly believe the Bulldog breed is the higher of the two. Nick, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so obviously, as you just said yourself, the fact that they pretty much have to be back-to-back is entirely the problem in itself. This isn't a case of a machine having to jump up 10 places and fitting them all in a new area as a whole. These are two that have to be ahead of each other by one place in an entire list of 100. So you're always going to be splitting the finest of hairs, and even if you try to be objective, most of the time it is going to come down to that slight bit of personal preference. Because I prefer Atomic as a machine, but I acknowledge Bulldog breed's slight edge in the trophies and even the team. Tony Summerfield had a decent showing in general, but yeah, I think it's always a case where people are just going to have an opinion one way or another, but they won't necessarily think it's an absolute outrage that one is going to be higher. In the comments, as you said as well, it was very much split, but yeah.
So let's see how split it is right now, eh?
Yeah, I don't mind. Let's put it that way. That's how close it is. I prefer Atomic, but I understand if Bulldog breed was higher. It really is that close, and I don't honestly think it matters much because they're both 45th and 46th, and you're never really going to get closer.
Also to mention, I don't think either of us would move them up or down. I think they're pretty much right where they should be.
Exactly.
That also comes into it as well. All right, well, let's move on to 259, who I think might be the most heavily discussed robot on our list outside the top 40. There was a lot of discussions about whether it should go down. And honestly, I don't see it.
No. It might be considered stubborn. And it might be one where, for the most part, we've agreed with our audience or acknowledged our faults. But here, I would also very much stand firm. I think 259 is that perfect Robot Wars what-if glass cannon with so much star power and appeal about it. And its flaws only make it even more appealing. So
yeah,
I think it's perfect.
That's the thing. We're not saying it's a good machine. We're just saying that it is an iconic machine
with potential, and that always carries weight. And it did do things in the arena as well. So
it's one of those few machines that instantly got people excited the moment it entered the arena before
Robot
it even
Wars
thought anything.
didn't always have machines that could instantly make you stand up from the very moment it started to even get near opponents. People were scared of it in the pits before its first fight even started. It was, oh, you've got 259. It's like, oh, no. And it's like, we haven't even seen 259 yet, and it sounds frightening. And Jonathan Pierce obviously hyping it up before the audience had even seen it because he almost knew that they'd immediately take to it. It's such a notable machine in its own right, and I understand the criticisms of it, but I think ultimately those criticisms have to be left to its in the arena flaws as opposed to how it's viewed by the overall community, because I just think it's an absolute star, and 44th is a really good position for it.
I remember the first time I saw 259, I was watching the Series 6 awards because I was just discovering what was on YouTube at the time. And the Series 6 awards came on, and they said Best Design went to 259, and it came on screen, and my jaw dropped.
It feels like a machine that you've seen for years, even on its very first appearance. It's that much of a notable thing. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's like Anarchy. It's very, very like Anarchy. And I suppose maybe that causes a contradiction in that I've advocated for Anarchy to go down, but I'm not advocating for 259 to go down. 259
has the in the arena extra factor about it.
Exactly.
Anarchy is a very, very accomplished walker, but it didn't exactly have much of a range to show that, and it wouldn't have exactly had potential against other really good machines to be a potential devastating factor in a tournament, whereas 259 could from nowhere wreck an all-star, or it could just get flipped over immediately. You just don't know with it, and that's exactly what makes it appealing.
Yeah, absolutely. Toast, what's your...
And I'm glad that we've been able to so comprehensively double down on the idea from you two especially, because if I recall correctly, I think it was me who was pushing for it to be that high in the first place.
Yeah, that
you guys
seems to
maybe
be right.
agreed straight away, but I certainly made the case for it, and yeah, I admit I'd probably be willing to move it below Atomic and Bulldog Breed, but then that's about it.
Yeah.
Like, I respect that the comments have made their opinions voiced, and it's always good to have that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this was never meant to be a list of the most successful robots, and that's clearly 259's weak point. But I would, at the very minimum, have it in this episode still.
Yeah, definitely would. Rating out the 40s, we've also got to be discussed Napalm, 13 Black, and the Steel Avenger. Does anyone have anything you want to add on those?
Not really.
I want to double down. I want to double down on the Steel Avenger. I think that there'd be some people who would argue that it should go down.
Yeah, like me.
For me, I've really got a second. Steel Avenger was one of my favourite robots in like 2009, and then I went off it. And then recently I've come back to it so strongly because I discovered that it's like the second most successful robot not to win a heat by combat victory, which is just such a bizarre thing. But
yeah, that's behind Dietor, of course.
Yeah, behind Dietor. And it also appeared in the most episodes out of any non-finalist, again, tied with Dietor. And to me, that sort of just makes me want to respect it more. And so, yeah, I think that a robot as exposed as Steel Avenger was shouldn't go down. Its Series 7 campaign was very hyped at the time. It was sort of one of those things that everybody could read about, because obviously Storm 2 had a website and Steel Avenger had a website. All these people, you could read about it quite in depth back before the wiki was what it was, and you could just go to there to read everything. I think that 41 is about... I wouldn't regret having it anywhere other than there. I wouldn't push for it to go higher, but I would certainly fight for it to stop going lower.
I would definitely keep it in the same episode. I think it's a worthy entry in the top 50. The stats are true and they help, but they're also... I think there's a reason we didn't notice that until we actually went away and found out that it had the 10 plus wins and the number of appearances, because you ultimately wouldn't expect it from this machine, which did get attention for its loved team and its recurring nature, but it was an under-the-radar machine for a reason. It's not a visually striking thing. It was never particularly impressive in the sense that the axe was always outclassed by other machines in the same series, and it certainly got wins, but how many of them were 1v1s? A lot less. And when you put it against really striking designs like 13 Black, Atomic, Supernova maybe even, I don't think it quite has that push for me, but I wouldn't go any lower than 46, 47.
Yeah, I could live with that too. Alright, cool. So now we're going to move on to the 30s, so we're getting into some good stuff here. We have in the 30s, we've got King Buxton at 40, Smidsy, Magnetar, Pulsar, Gabriel, 36 Sir Chromelot, Thor, Gravity, S3, Typhoon 2, and Plunderbird.
Smidsy making the top 40 is an odd one for me.
It is, and I think now seeing the Steel Avenger in the 40s, if we were to move the Steel Avenger down, I think Smidsy would come out of the 30s, and go into there with it. And either Napalm or 13 Black would probably jump up to make the top 40.
I'd definitely give Napalm a boost, yeah.
Yeah. I hate to keep mentioning Atomic and Bulldog Breed all the time, but when you look at the fact that Smidsy is 6 places above them when Bulldog Breed's credentials and Smidsy's credentials were a perfect match until Series 7. Series 3, they both fell in the first round. Yes, that's true. Series 4, they both made the heat final. Series 5, they made the heat final. Series 6, they fell in the second round to the seed in an early draw. all the way through, they had the exact same thing. And then the Tag Team Terror came along, and Bulldog Breed got the highest seeding in Series 7, and then it made the top 8.
Smidsy fell in the first round of the Tag Team Terror.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Smidsy also got defeated by Atomic, who still stands out to me as a much more appealing and memorable design than Smidsy. Maybe that's a bit of my bias talking, but I think that it's Smidsy purely by virtue that it's not inseparable like that pair is, has just crept above them, sticking along with kind of the Steel Avenger in the sense that it was a long-running machine that kept coming back somewhat unchanged. And yeah, when you see how it's actually so much higher than two machines that directly outclassed it, that's where it becomes a sore point in my eyes.
I'd probably agree that Smidsy could tumble. It hurts a little bit because I do love Smidsy, but I think that what taught that for me was when I was trying to get people to do the Smidsy podcast, and no one would do it with me, except for Anthony, who was his favourite robot. And to me, that really just said it all. So I kind of wanted to boost it. Smidsy is pretty much considered one of the best, if not the most successful robot never to win a heat, whereas Bulldog Breed sort of lost that credentials because it did actually win a heat at the end. That certainly is a point in Smidsy's favour, but when you've got Supernova almost 10 places below it, who's probably the other one who's got that sort of credentials as best robot not to win a heat, I would definitely probably push Smidsy again to about that 46 spot, move Atomic and Bulldog Breed up to the high 40s, and then, yeah, Napalm up into the 30s.
Cool.
Yeah. The sore point for me, and the one that causes me the most grief, and always did, was Magnetar and Pulsar, who we forgot to mention at the start of the episode as one of the teams that just sort of universally got merged, because it's like a Dietor Nemesis thing. They really are the same machine. You can stick on a new name, but it's the same machine.
Yeah, only this time we couldn't hide it, and it was the only actively merged segment of the bunch.
Yes. And with that being the case, you couldn't write a script for Pulsar and a script for Magnetar. The Pulsar script would just be all about Ironside, because that's really all Pulsar has to discuss, whereas Magnetar, when you add that on, it's got like more of a narrative about unreliability and, improving. To me, 38 was just, I couldn't handle 38 for Magnetar Pulsar. It was way too high. It was originally like 33, and I was able to beat it down to 38. I would probably dump it another 10 places down, but no one else agreed with me, and I just gave up trying to argue that.
Sorry, mate, I still don't agree with you. And I don't think I ever will. No, Magnetar and even Pulsar were so hyped going into every single series they were in. Always delivered very powerful moments despite their flaws. It's basically a glorified and better 259, and yeah, you
have 259 and Concussion had a baby basically.
And Ellis himself has a bit of appeal. So yeah, no, it's one of the big reboot names. It's got a lot of what if about it, yet it also showed power in the arena. I think it's very much in about the right place. I'd probably move it up by a couple still, but 38th is good enough for me.
Yeah, for me, I would probably help to get it back to that position it was originally in before the campaign. 2 grand final appearances is a massive deal, no matter how you slice it. And I think when judging classic series robots, it's mainly about how fondly they were remembered and the impact that they left on the show as it developed. While for the reboot, now that time's passed, I think to get them into the same kind of level as an icon, they have to be still discussed nowadays. And for me, there's no doubt that Magnetar is easily one of the most discussed reboot competitors. Even now, people still want to see it in BattleBots. People still want to know how it would have done against Carbide. And now that modern machined robots have advanced and become a lot more common, you see a lot of designs now that have that resemblance to Magnetar. The design's very much still alive, and absolutely I wouldn't move it down.
Yeah, and point taken is a lot of people were really upset that it lost to Behemoth. I know I almost turned Series 10 off after Magnetar got eliminated because it was just going to be boring and predictable after Magnetar got eliminated. So I'll definitely agree to that. So yeah, look, maybe I can see your point. I'd still drop it down, but I agree with what you're saying, and I see it. Speaking of reboot bots that are still discussed, Gabriel and Thor are our other reboot bots in this section. What are our thoughts on Gabriel and Thor?
I think they're a smidge high.
Yeah, I actually think they're probably in the wrong order, you know. Rather than
I think I would have
Gabriel
Gabriel higher
Magnetar,
than
I would
Thor
have
these
Magnetar,
days.
Gabriel, Thor.
I would probably say that Thor has certainly overperformed because Series 10, well, you guys know my opinion on Series 10 Heat E, but Thor seemed to just get less exciting every year.
Yeah,
And
the problem very
Series
much
10
for it.
especially.
Yeah, the problem very much for it was that it had a very modest but respectable end of the classic series. Then it got a bit of a good reputation in the live events. Obviously was a very powerful axe. Came into Series 8, proved itself, and then as you say, it just absolutely faded. Like, it was always there in the reboot and always a bot and person in Jason that the show wanted to promote, which gives it a good spot on the list. But I do think that it has, a few too many forgettable battles to really, really have it quite that high.
Too many fights with Mr. Speed Squared, too many fights with Coyote, just too many fights with Shockwave. There's just too much of the same with Thor. And even in the 10 Robot Rumble, it was the one machine in the 10 Robot Rumble that you forget that was there. Even Expulsion fell into the pit really funnily. Thor just was never... Its axe didn't work.
Yeah.
It just had such a whimper end to it. Obviously, the World Series was a mess as well. Too many fights with Tough as Nails. Just,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we allowed the classic series to give it that bit of extra weight on number of
Blood
appearances,
Grand
but
Finalist.
ultimately, if you look at the top 100, I think exactly a fifth of the list was reboot competitors. So if you think, right, we're just doing a classic series, top 100 icons, we've got 20 extra spaces, but no reboot value at all, would Thor make it? Still probably not. It got to be an episode winner in Extreme 2, but that's the most you can say, unfortunately. And as a reboot star, that absolutely gives Thor bypass into the top 50, but not as high as 35.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think Thor could probably... I agree that I would probably have Pulsar above Thor now. So Thor probably drops down to around the Atomic Bulldog breed region. Obviously, Thor's a grand finalist where they're not, but bear in mind that Thor got to be a grand finalist with the same amount of wins as Atomic and Bulldog breed, and Thor technically didn't even win a heat. He got the wild
It's a
card,
grand
so.
finalist, but not a heat winner.
So, yeah,
passing
I think
mention
it's
to
worth it.
Gravity, by the way, in this
Hang on, do you want
range.
to discuss Gabriel first? Was there anything else you wanted to say on Gabriel?
I am happy with where Gabriel is.
I think me too.
I personally am a bit uncomfortable with it that high. I think it gets quite a lot of weight through one or two very publicised events that happen, but I'm not quite sure. Its design is very striking. It had a couple of really, really good moments, but so did a lot of machines in the group below it, going down by 10, 15. I do think the 30s for Gabriel is very, very lofty.
You're right. The more I think about it, the more I think that Atomic and Bulldog breed would probably take a jump of 10 with Napalm.
Yeah, they'd be holding hands and going up together, but they would have to take a very big jump.
And I would say, to me now, Thor, Smidsy, and maybe Gabriel all drop out of the 30s to go with it. Sorry, Toast, do you want to go on to the thing you were about to say about Gravity?
Yeah, there was very little to say about Gravity because I think all three of us agree it's in about the right spot, and I was pleased that the YouTube comments validated that as well. They had no opposition to it at all. but I'd be remiss not to pass on the thoughts of Luke, one of our main guys in the podcast, because that was probably his strongest opposition throughout the entire ranking process.
Yeah,
he could
and
not
everyone
comprehend
knows Luke doesn't
gravity
have strong
being this
opinions. Luke doesn't get passionate about much. He's like the chill, laid-back moderator guy. But so to see him mildly express an opinion is like me and Toast having a full-blown raging argument about the big cheese. It's just like, it's as passionate as Luke gets. So, yeah, worth remissing. But yeah, I think overall we're all pretty much agreed. Gravity, yes, it was a one-time series semi-finalist, but Gravity's a one-time semi-finalist in the way that, I don't know, there's just so many, it's a one-time semi-finalist, but that's really a technicality in terms of how big that semi-final appearance was and how important it was.
Yeah.
And how memorable it was as well. So, yeah. Sacromalot, there was a couple of shouts for Sacromalot to be like 16 places higher. I definitely can't get around that. I think Sacromalot was a good spot. Sacromalot and Plunderbird both being in the 30s was nice to sort of wrap up the comedy entrance, with the exception of Dietor. And Nuts was to get the comedy ones done before we got to the top 30. I definitely can't see them going up that level.
I do think there is a slight tweaking that could be made to the bottom of the 20s and these couple of last joke bots in the 30s. I do think we could maybe tweak that slightly, and maybe Nuts is a bit high comparatively as well.
Yeah, we'll come to Nuts in a minute, actually. Yeah,
but yeah, I would maybe move Sacromalot up by 1 or 2, and I'd definitely move Plunderbird up by a good handful.
Interesting. So Typhoon 2 is at 32. I think we're all pretty happy with S3 where it is. Typhoon 2 obviously is our very first champion to appear on the list. And I think all I wanted to say about Typhoon 2 before we ask maybe should it go up a spot, I don't think I would, is that I really think that there has been a change of opinion on Typhoon 2 in the last 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. It's no longer considered like this huge negative.
Thank God.
That it is, yeah, because it is really. And one of our guys, I think it was Jack, said just even today, people who always dismiss Typhoon as, just flip it over. Well, they're the same people who would be saying, just attack Tombstone's wheels, stupid. It's like, it's not that easy.
No.
There's a reason why Typhoon 2 beat every single flipper it ever fought, except for, in the Extreme 2 Annihilator where it was already not spinning. When Typhoon 2 was spinning, you can't just flip it over. It beat 1, 2, 3, 4 flippers in a row, and they're not even bad flippers. Like Thermidor and Atomic and Iron Ore, like these are big deal flippers, and just no one gets it over. So I think that as sort of time's gone on and Storm 2 came back and wasn't as good as everyone wanted it to be, and I think that people have sort of come round more on Typhoon 2, and I'm pleased by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I live for the world where Typhoon gets credit, because I've liked it for a long time, and it's only natural that opinion would shift when a certain Ed Hoppet made his views on the Seventh Wars campaign so vocal, while the Typhoon team were totally absent and could not defend themselves, and they already had the existing controversy of dominating the middleweight competition. It was sadly a bit of an inevitability that the world was working against Typhoon, but finally, now that obviously the actual builders of Typhoon, like Peter Bennett, we've never heard from since, but Gary Cairns at least carried the torch and made that a bit more known. Typhoon finishing in 32nd, I think it was specifically my idea, because I wrote the script fairly early on, and a point that I really wanted to stress is that not only does it appear extremely late into Robot Wars' run by being a Seventh Wars exclusive, it's late into the Seventh Wars as well,
yes.
Appearing in the 15th episode when many people had turned off. And yeah, you could genuinely remove that patch of 5 episodes from Robot Wars and Typhoon 2 would no longer exist, apart from the
so if they had
Annihilator.
the Series 6 format where it ends at heat L instead of heat P.
And
Yeah,
you know,
you
maybe
lose
it wouldn't
four.
have made the cut in that slightly smaller cast because
gosh.
Typhoon in the qualifiers was a shambles. It was frankly lucky to get in from the team's account. I'm certainly glad it did. I think I would now make space for it in the top 30, just seeing how shocked people were at its low finish. And yeah, 32nd, and then the next champion to appear is Eruption in 20th. That is a pretty large gap. I think at the very least, the top 30 was when things got really suspenseful.
Yeah.
People could actually make predictions with the remaining 30.
Yeah, 'cause
Typhoon 2 would have been a
friend,
fun wildcard to have in those discussions, and it's kind of a shame in that sense that
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
true.
you know, Gemini was there
Would
instead,
have been,
for example.
yeah, more. Yeah, that's a fair point. But even Gemini will come to in a second. I think that Typhoon 2 would have been a fun one in there. I think 101 and Spawn Again and Gemini were probably the three that weren't as much fun for people to rank, but people like Crash Bash on the wiki were able to figure out the top 30 pretty much from there on, and a lot of people had as well, certainly by the top 20. And you're right, it would have been fun to sort of try and rank them. I like Typhoon 2 at 32. I would probably push it to 30 now, and push down either Spawn Again 101 or Gemini to below it, but I'm not sure exactly. So on to the 20s. So we've got Gemini, Spawn Again, 101, Exterminator, Thermidor 2, Aftershock, Storm 2, Nuts 2, Wild Thing, Dominator 2. Actually, you know what? Aftershock would be the one that I probably push down now that I'm
Yes.
thinking about it. Aftershock is definitely too high.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Again, shout outs to Crash Bash. I think he was the one that definitely made us notice that one, where he was the first to properly predict who was going to be in the 30, and Aftershock was the only one he doubted that might not have been there. And I get how that doubt was planted now, because, you know, its peak was Series 9, where it got 4th. Ironside 3 got 3rd, and we put it in 91st. And that's not to say that Aftershock should be in any sense below Ironside 3. Absolutely not. It was far more loved and remembered. But, I mean, wow, the difference that a single Series 9 campaign can make for these spinners. Apparently, we thought it was worth jumping 75% of the way up the list. And I think with that 25th ranking, maybe we were still deciding if Shockwave would properly be integrated.
We had no way of knowing. We had absolutely no way of knowing if Shockwave was going to make the list. We figured out Shockwave was off about the 80s range. So yeah, we definitely didn't. And I think that because we're doing this list 18 months after Series 10, yes, Aftershock had a disappointing Series 10, but it still had 4 fights. It had, 2 really great fights that people loved. And obviously it had a great Series 9. But I think that without that recency bias in our minds, we look at Aftershock more as a complete package, and we look at it more of a Killatron and less of a, something else that does really well in like a one-off. Where it's like it's a hot and cold performer, and we give it a ranking probably more about the 30s or 40s. I think
not
Aftershock,
that low, but
Aftershock probably would go to me where Thor is now, like 35.
I would basically find Magnetar's new spot and then put Aftershock 1 to 2 spaces above it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good comparison. Sorry, yeah, Magnetar Pulsar is a really good comparison, because Magnetar Pulsar had one extra series, had a similar peak, and was more successful just on number of wins. So that's a very good comparison to make.
Yeah, like Aftershock, it had maybe the more striking design, you would say, and overall the better success, but it had no what-ifs remaining. We saw Aftershock take on every reboot all-star, and it pretty much lost to all of them.
Yeah, the only one it beat was a crippled Apollo, and unless you want to, it beat Rapid, a crippled Apollo, Terahertz, if you want to call Terahertz a reboot all-star. But yeah, it lost to Eruption pretty decisively in Series 10 anyway. Lost to Ironside, lost to Carbide too many times, and even lost to Big Nipper, which sort of gives you concerns about it losing to Magnetar and all those sorts of machines. So Yeah, no, definitely agree with that.
I would put it directly above S3.
Okay.
Very much the S3 of the reboot, but with much more notable moments, and was always like that bit more competitive than S3. So
Yeah, good one.
yeah, not too much more to say, but yeah, directly above S3. There you go. End of story.
Lovely. All right, so the batch of robots to discuss here. I think let's talk about Gemini, because Gemini was such a weird one. We had people who were rating it very early on. Toast was making the case for Gemini to make the top 30, and we all pretty much agreed. But it was really fascinating to see viewers saying that Gemini was way too high, through to viewers who were predicting it for 21 in the range of 10. So I think that just goes to show that Gemini is probably pretty good where it is.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah,
probably move it
pretty
down
much.
a couple just to move a couple of the other ones below it into a more fitting position, but Gemini is absolutely a very notable part of Robot Wars history in its own right, so definitely a high 30s area robot at least.
Yeah, we definitely benefited from having it in the 30 in the end, because seeing people's predictions was absolutely wild. We could be making up this kind of story based on one comment, putting it in 21st, but there was genuinely, earnestly several that had it in 21 to 22, and other people were predicting it to start appearing in the list as far as like the 50 to 41 range. So it's just kind of utterly unrankable, which is it's brilliant to have those little examples, and I'm glad that we kind of got it in the mean position between that kind of range that it could have finished in.
So 101, let's talk about 101, because Crash Bash in his coverage did complain quite extensively that 101 was so much higher than King Buxton, and I get it, but I think as Toast said, there's more to 101 than just its rivalry with King Buxton. Its World Championship performance has got to be, taken into account. King Buxton doesn't have anything like that. Series 3 top 8 is much more impactful than Series 4. So Series 2 top 8. And 101 just had a more fun Series 4. There's multiple factors. Is 12 spaces appropriate? Not sure. But to me, it would be King Buxton moving up a few spots in the 30s, not 101 moving down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was definitely an assumption from not just Crash Bash, but a lot of commenters in general, that the two had to be back-to-back. And I don't agree. Again, we said, is 12 spaces too much of a gap? Probably yes. 101 maybe feels a little out of its depth in the top 30, but absolutely 101 gets ahead of King B, because, yeah, I could go through everything that TG said again, but the main thing is the World Championship carried so much weight. It's the reason that robots like Cerberus and Weldor can even contend for the list at all, and 101 got third in that. And yeah, the Series 3 nearly making the grand final, that certainly matters a lot more than King B's same place finish, but with only 3 fights along the way, and didn't take Hypnotist to a 1 point judge's decision margin. I think 101 is probably within the 30 to 35 region, but if King B moved up a little bit as well, that's fine, but they absolutely don't have to be linked together, because 101 has its own achievements that really push it forward.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about Storm 2. Nick, what's your view on Storm 2? Because there was a comparison made between Storm 2 and Really Big Cheese once people realised Really Big Cheese was going to make the top 20 and Storm 2 was in 24. People were sort of advocating that Storm 2's UTA is enough to push it higher. Obviously, you've also got the World Champion, runner-up, controversy, all that factor. What's your view on Storm 2 at 24th?
I think it's in about the right place. I would move it above Nuts 2, but I don't think it has. It just appeared too late in the show to push it above those recurring semi-finalists who were there all the time for 3 or 4 series in a row. It's a bit like Typhoon, which has its limit in how high it can be. the notable achievements it did carry out push it to a really high spot in the first place. But overall, Dominator 2, Wild Thing, Stinger, and then the Series 1 veterans and Series 2 veterans, it's just too much for the general Robot Wars storytelling for me to say that Storm 2 would be an absolute pivotal character in those like more charming, more known. Like, imagine Storm 2 as a bit of merchandise, for example, or something on a video game. I just don't think it would stand out at all. And yeah, it's a high performing competitor, but it isn't necessarily a true Robot Wars staple as high as the other semi-finalists and veterans. So I think it's virtually in the right spot there, and absolutely do not agree that it can have comparative moments with something like Wheelie Big Cheese, for example.
No, definitely not. Because, I mean, the Steel Avenger Uta is not even the third thing I think about with Storm 2. Honestly, I think about Storm 2 getting flipped out of the arena before I think about the Steel Avenger 1. These days anyway. And that's just me. I'm not saying that's what everybody's like. But, yeah, I think Storm 2, the Series 7 title fight, is the first thing I think of, followed by the Series 8 appearance, followed by the World Championship. And I'm like, oh yeah, it did get an Uta, didn't it? But that's just me on that. Toast, did you have anything on Storm 2?
I think it's totally in the right spot. It's extremely notable. I think it would finish in this position with or without Series 8. That kind of, it adds pluses and negatives. And yeah, ultimately it's just not enough of a silhouette that the casual fans would attach to. I mean, there was a reason Mentorn were trying to get rid of it. I'm personally a big fan of watching Storm 2 in its battles. I really enjoy it. But, I mean, there had to be some kind of reason they didn't want another black Wedgebot to do as well as it did.
Yeah, especially its name's not particularly exciting either. Like, Wheelie Big Cheese is one of the best names ever, and Storm 2 is one of the worst names, most boring names there is. Anyway, so some of the veterans, now the rest of our 20s range, Nuts 2 I think we've all agreed would probably drop. 23 is ridiculously high, and was definitely an afterglow of how much we loved it in Series 10. I'd probably have Nuts at the bottom of this group of 10. It still definitely would make these heights, but definitely not at 23rd. That's just a bit much for me.
Yeah, we knew it. He needed to be higher than Aftershock, and by virtue of Aftershock getting 5, Nuts 2 at 25, Nuts 2 was going to get 23. I think it's still worthy of the top 30, but below Exterminator for me.
And so that brings us to this batch of 5, who are sort of your persistent veterans, which is Dominator 2, Wild Thing, Thermidor 2, Exterminator, and Spawn Again. Some are harder to rank than others, but as this group of 5, I think that with the exception of probably having Exterminator above Thermidor 2, we got them in the right order and in the right segment. There were some calls for Spawn Again to go much lower. I don't agree with that. I agree that it's lower than Dominator 2 and Wild Thing because they have one or two extra appearances, while Spawn Again's spread over Spawn of Scudder and Scudder's Revenge. What do you guys think about that group of 5 veterans?
Spawn Again, yeah, definitely the weakest. Has a lot of flaws that make it generally more unlikable, but it's still very notable in its own right. So move it down by a handful, but only say 3 or 4, nothing major. Exterminator, would I put it above Thermidor 2? I suppose so, because of Series 7. But a lot of different designs in there, in a way, could hurt it. So I think they're very much interchangeable, as it shows, with them being back-to-back. And then Dominator 2 and Wild Thing absolutely are the 2 that stand out the most. Very consistent, very likeable, very durable, always give good fights, and always could be a threat to the biggest machines on the show. And I would put Dominator 2 the higher of the 2. but very much the two at the top of that area, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of
wouldn't-
discussion. Sorry, Toast, you go first.
The bit of an awkward half sentence for me. I was going to say I wouldn't change the order of this group at all. I would definitely be happy to see Exterminator move up by virtue of the reboot robots dropping. 27 does feel uncomfortably low for Exterminator, but I'm happy for Thermidor to go above it, and then the rest are kind of more objectively beating it out. So I think it gets to move to 25, which feels a lot happier.
The discussions around Wild Thing and Dominator 2 were always tough because to me they always felt like they were going to be the 21, 22. They were definitely not going to be top 10 machines, and I felt like there was enough robots in the top 20 that had to be mentioned, whereas Dominator 2 and Wild Thing they were always that best of the rest group, and they were like a perfect 21, 22. Unlike 101 and King B, these two were always going to be back-to-back for me, Dominator and Wild Thing. Spawn again and S3 being much further down, but these two definitely being back-to-back. Could they push into a top 20? Because a few people did campaign for Dominator 2 to move a bit higher. I can't see it, because as Toast mentioned before, or Nick mentioned before, I believe, there was that group of, Stinger, Danton Kia, Terahertz, and the Series 1 to 2 icons. I just think that they all have a big moment that's more than the consistent presence of Dominator and Wild Thing.
Yeah, I think if anyone would be vulnerable, it could be Stinger, but at the same time, Stinger's very much a wild card, and as you say, has that really notable high point, so it would be the only one vulnerable, but again, you'd be asking for one place, and I don't think neither of those two can try to push, even have a case to push above the Series 1 to 2 veterans and machines like that.
Alright, well that will wrap it up for what is turning into a 4-part podcast now. So we're going to wrap it up and focus on our top 20 in the last video.